Then I shall begin. Ladies and gentlemen, as the world's moral and economic hegemon, the United States of America cannot possibly allow for the perpetuation of a system which principally restricts the rights of workers and employers in regards to their contracts, and which also it contributes to the miring of the United States of America in the world economy. Hello, my name is Sam Pachkazi. I am a first speaker on behalf of EF, and I'm here to proudly affirm and proffer to you a resolution that we must and we should abolish the minimum wage. Now, we have four contentions, so let's dive right into it. Now, our first contention is that the minimum wage implements an artificial floor for businesses in regards to their wages, and thus principally prices workers out of a job market and makes it more difficult for businesses to maintain a profit, specifically small businesses. Now, small businesses inherently, by their very nature, run a smaller profit margin than large corporations. Why? They don't have the same access to the principle of the economy of scale. Therefore, they inherently run a smaller profit margin and are able to pay workers less. So what does this mean? This means that workers that are seeking a position at a small business, or workers that are less experienced seeking a position at a business like this, are priced out of the job market and are not able to be hired and are not able to put their foot on this important rung on the ladder, on the corporate ladder. So what does this mean, Judge? The impact of this is that we're going to have less people. We have less people employed overall as a result of a minimum wage. We're going to have businesses going out of business more often, and we're going to have large corporations dominating over small businesses more often. Now, what's an example of this? Gas stations. Gas stations are principally, you can't export a gas station. You can't send a gas station overseas. They have to be on the ground in America. Now, in the Northeast, in many states in the Northeast, it is legal to pump your own gas. So a laborer at a gas station gets paid minimum wage, and the average profit margin of a gas station in the Northeast is 3%. Over 25% of gas stations, individually owned gas stations in the Northeast, fail within the first year, with many business owners citing the minimum wage and the amount that they have to pay workers as a big factor in the shutting down. And in addition, in Manhattan, 50% of restaurants close within the first year, and when you poll these business owners, you also see that the amount that they have to pay their workers, even though the workers are operating primarily on tips, still is too much for them to afford and still puts a dent in their profit margin. And our second contention is that the minimum wage restricts the amount of people that are working full-time and rather delegates more people to working part-time instead. Judge, we cannot simply wave a magic wand and say that there is more money for the workers. Myself and my partner believe in a principle we like to call economic entropy. In other words, no mandate, no governmental provision can simply wave a magic wand and say workers have more money. Businesses have a finite amount of money which they can spend on their workers and which they can pay their workers. So as a result, when the hourly wages increase, businesses have to compensate in one way or the other. One of the ways in which they can compensate is this. They can cut back workers from full-time to part-time. What is the impact of this? The impact of this is that workers are then put lower, on a lower rung of corporate ladder, because part-time work is lower on the corporate ladder than full-time work, and this also decreases their ability to be socially and economically mobile, in addition to the fact that this principally reduces the amount of money that they make. Now here's an example of this. In San Diego, after the minimum wage is increased, the amount of jobs in the restaurant business created monthly was dropped from 5,200 to 1,300. And in California, over 330,000 jobs were lost within the first month of the minimum wage being increased. Since this shows that the principle of a floor existing principally results in more part-time workers. Now, our third contention is that a minimum wage is not necessary to protect the rights of workers. Judge, what countries are known for having the best workers' rights in the world? Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, etc. They have the highest human development index and the highest worker salary, $25 an hour on average. They do not maintain a minimum wage. Unions bargain there. Unions bargain on their behalf. In addition, Israel didn't have a minimum wage for a long time and has a very similar economic structure to America, and for a long time their workers were getting paid higher wages than American workers. This goes to show that you don't need a minimum wage to protect the rights of workers. And our final contention, Judge, even if you don't believe our economic arguments, which you should, we got a lot of evidence, even if you don't believe those, we tie it together with the principle of libertarianism. A government cannot interfere in the contract of a worker, and an employer principally violates the principle of freedom of association and freedom of labor as protected in the First Amendment. Thank you. I stand down for cross-examination.
All right, let's talk about all your contentions.
Gladly.
So the real link into most of your contentions is that small businesses can't afford this minimum wage, right?
Well,
Yes.
They can't afford it,
Okay,
more or less.
So if we prove that small businesses will get more money under our world, do we win that link?
Not necessarily. You don't necessarily win the debate because we still have a principle associated
do
with.
we win those links? Like the link into your argument, do we win it?
You're asking if you win the argument, you win the argument. Yes.
Sure. Okay. Cool. All right. Now let's talk about unions. Are you aware that unions cause outsourcing?
How so?
Okay, so what do unions do? They band together, and what does this result in? This results in strikes, right? Take, for example, last year in April.
We haven't had major union strikes in the United States of America since the 1930s and the Great Depression.
No. Have you? Okay.
Successful ones, at least.
So last year, on April, the Verizon, there was over 40,000 workers. They went on a strike, and it caused the Verizon stock market to drop incredibly, and it led to all these bad things.
In which industry were these workers?
What?
In which industries were these workers?
Internet, I guess.
Internet industry? Are you telling me the software engineers are unionized and go on strike?
I can't tell. I don't know the exact people that are on
Software
strike.
engineers aren't unionized. Blue collar workers, teachers, and nurses are unionized.
Well,
Software engineers aren't unionized. That's
Can I
not
please
true.
ask my question?
You can ask your question.
All right, sure. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to say here is that doesn't it inherently lead to more outsourcing since companies don't want to deal with unions in the first place?
Outsourcing is bad for public image, just in regards to
Okay, so
corporations.
let's say it's bad.
And actually, I'll tell you what really leads to outsourcing. Mandating a certain wage leads to outsourcing.
Okay, so why?
Because when you create, as I stated, an artificial floor, some businesses can't reach that floor. Actually, if anyone can afford it, it'd be big corporations who are the ones that are doing the outsourcing.
Yeah,
But
I get it. Okay, so let's talk about jobs in your second contention. You talk about how jobs dropped from 5,200 to 1,300, correct?
just to clarify more specifically, that was San Diego restaurant industry monthly
Yeah,
job production.
Okay, so can you tell me definitively that the minimum wage was the causation for this?
I'm sorry to inform you that 4,000 jobs just don't drop out of the air. Just don't drop out of the air
So
in
there's
one industry in a
multiple
city.
factors, right? You can't just say the minimum wage did.
Now, judges, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Minimum wage was established in 1938 to combat poverty and give people working ability to finance themselves at the bare minimum. The minimum wage has gradually increased from where it originated at 25 cents an hour to now $7.25 an hour. Now, the effects of minimum wage on society have been highly debated, as some say it has been beneficial and some say it is not. But as the negative side, we believe an abolishment of the minimum wage is simply not necessary. We will define the minimum wage as both the state and the federal minimum wages. Now, judges, before I begin, I'm going to offer you two key observations. One, according to Danny Rodrigue of Harvard University, nothing has worked better than economic growth in enabling societies to improve the quality of life for their members, including those at the very bottom of the spectrum. In fact, according to the OECD, a 10% increase in a country's average income reduces poverty by 20 to 30%. Thus, in order to spur economic growth, the negative side will prioritize quality jobs that will create a disposable income for workers, or in other words, extra money in their back pocket that can be spent on other items besides the bare minimum. Now, my second observation is that we observe that because it's the country of people, we are obligated to serve each and every citizen equally and not prioritize those who have a specific race or such. So, in order to accurately weigh this round, all lives matter, and whichever team can provide for the people must win. Now, my first argument, judges, is that raising the minimum wage will lead to economic benefits. Raising the minimum wage will help increase disposable income for many low-income workers by providing them with a higher wage. By increasing disposable income for workers, we encourage them to spend more money on the market, helping stimulate the economy. In fact, according to Palomar of Economics, an increase in permanent income causes consumer spending to increase significantly. Furthermore, according to the Congressional Budget Office, a rise in the federal minimum wage to $10.10 would result in a $2 billion increase in overall real income. Now, judges, there are four important impacts to this raise in the economy. The first is decreased poverty. According to the Department for International Development, a 1% increase in per capita income reduces poverty by 1.7%. This is corroborated by economist Dubé, who finds that increasing the minimum wage to $10.10 would reduce the number of people living below the poverty line by 6.8 million. The second impact is increased spending on health and education. Look to the DFID, which finds that for every 1% increase in per capita income, there is a 1.1% increase in education expenditure and a 1.4% increase in health expenditure. My third impact is decreased child mortality rates. According to Bolotra of Childhood Mortality and Economic Growth Center, a 1% increase in GDP is associated with a reduction in infant mortality by 0.7%. And the fourth and final impact is decreased spending on means-tested welfare programs. According to the Economic Policy Initiative, a higher minimum wage would result in a $17 billion reduction in means-tested welfare program spending. Thus, the government will have more money to spend on other needs that the economy actually needs. Now, Judge, my second argument is that abolishing the minimum wage will lead to labor unions. Currently, the minimum wage has been acting as a protection for low-income workers. However, abolishing the minimum wage would push workers to seek protection in other ways. In fact, according to The Economist, those at the low end of the labor market lack power and ability to negotiate good deals with employees, so they're often subject to poor and unfair terms. Thus causes workers to join labor unions in order to pool their bargaining power of individual workers in order to increase the chance of fair division in commercial spoils. There are two impacts of increasing labor unions. The first is decreasing economic output by trillions of dollars. According to Vedder and Galloway, for every 1% increase of the labor force belonging to labor unions, real income growth per capita is lowered by 1.24 percentage points. This number is intended to increase significantly if the minimum wage is abolished. And the second and final impact of the increase in labor unions is that labor unions encourage outsourcing and ultimately leads to income inequality. So, Judge, in order for the negative to win this debate, we have to prove that the economy is better. Thank you.
All right, everybody ready? Judges? Yes? Partner?
Uh-huh.
And Meg?
Yes.
Then I shall begin. Now, the quote you provide, well, first of all, how's your day going? Semifinals.
Yeah, it's going
That's
good.
it. I'm glad to hear that. Now, that quote you provided at the end about how workers currently not being able to negotiate a wage and having lower bargaining powers resulting in increased unionization, correct?
Correct.
So, does that quote not say that in the status quo, workers are not able to bargain and that is resulting in increased unionization?
Actually, the problem is when we...
No, I didn't ask you what the problem was. I asked you if that's...
Yeah, I'm responding to you. The problem is the abolishment of the minimum wage. What that will do will cause an increase in labor unionization.
But did your own quote not just say that workers currently not being able to bargain in the current system is increasing unionization?
No, it's not.
It said workers not being able to bargain with their employers at their low wages currently is resulting in increased unionization. So you might want to recheck your statistics.
No,
maybe that was intended for your AF case. But
okay.
Another thing you stated, what do you think is a better way to predict a result? On the day of, going out and check the weather, for example, going out and checking whether or not it's raining, or relying on a weather forecast from 2 days ago?
Going out and checking if it's raining.
Precisely. So why do you suggest that your economic predictions from economists, their opinions, are superior to our case studies?
What case studies did you provide us that aren't opinionated?
California, 330,000, 15,000. Norway, Sweden, none of them have
Actually,
minimum
first of all, I'm glad you brought up Norway and Sweden, because Norway and Sweden, you
No,
talk about the...
I didn't ask you about Norway and Sweden.
Okay,
I asked you why you think your predictions are better.
I completely understand what you asked me.
Then answer the question. Why are your predictions better than our case studies?
Because, first of all, Norway and Sweden don't have the same amount of population as the United States, so you can't just tell us that because Norway and Sweden are paying their people more without minimum wage, their economy is flourishing. They don't have the same amount of people.
Now here's the issue. You cannot provide, now here's the issue. Israel also for a long time down in minimum wage, and their economic distribution is similar to ours. The top 1% in Israel makes the same amount as ours, and they have a similar post-industrial economy. So that would be an example that contravenes what you're talking about.
America's economy is better than every single one of the countries you mentioned.
Let's start at the top of the case, where they basically tell you there's an artificial floor and the seats of unemployment. Yet during Crossfire, they can see that as long as we win the link, we win this argument. And so what we see here is that when we increase the minimum wage, it leads to more disposable income, and this means that these citizens who get this disposable income can reinvest it back into the economy, which leads to overall better things, which leads to more small businesses, and as a result leads to more overall jobs in the long term. And I'll talk more about this later in their second intention. And furthermore, let's talk about they tell you these big companies are really bad and that big companies are taking over. First of all, we see that in the status quo, big companies aren't taking over, so that's not really a problem. And furthermore, even if big companies did take over, look to the Sherman Antitrust Act, which basically gets rid of and makes it illegal for monopolies to exist. So try that argument there. Now it's on to their second contention, where they basically tell you part-time jobs. Once again, this is pretty much the exact same thing as their first contention, which is just talking about how these companies, these smaller companies, have to cut wages, they have to do these part-time things, and that's really bad. And so all we have to do here is that if we increase minimum wage and we lead to an increase in the economy, that means these small businesses get more money, that means they are able to employ more people, that basically turns their entire argument. And look at the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, which finds that when we increase the minimum wage, we lead to $2 million in real income on net. So we see that in the long term, we end up winning these two arguments, turn all their impacts. Now let's go on to, they tell you jobs that went from 5,200 to 1,300, yet when I asked them in Crossfire for direct causation, they couldn't provide to you. All they said was, they don't just randomly disappear, yet they couldn't actually give me direct causation, which is why you can't actually buy that argument. Furthermore, they tell you, jobs in 1 month period in California dropped by 330,000, yet 1 month period. Right? When we see here is we're advocating for the long term. The long term almost always outweighs the short term because of the fact that in the long term we're increasing disposable income. Look to the CBO CEO who finds $2 million increase. That means more consumer spending. That means the economy is stimulating. That means we're going to have more jobs in the long term. Please turn all those impacts. Now let's go into the third contention, which is about protection, and they talk to you about unions. First of all, note that this concedes a link into unions, and furthermore, this means that the economic growth is going to be substantially decreased. In fact, look to the stats we give you. You see a 1% increase in labor unions leads to 1.24% decrease in economic growth. So we see here that you can go back to our economic impacts that we tell you in our first contention, and that's decreasing. That's not good. And furthermore, let's talk about outsourcing. Right? We tell you that this concedes into the impact of outsourcing, and outsourcing does extremely bad things because it lowers the wage of the lowest workers and it increases the wage of the highest workers. This leads to income inequality, and there's so many impacts to income inequality. First of all, look to Lurman, who quantifies that a 1 point increase in the Gini coefficient reduces GDP per capita by 1.1% in the long term, and in the long run amounts to 4.5%. You can go back to our economic impacts that we tell you, and furthermore, Perk finds that for 97% of the time, unequal society leads to higher violence. That's impacting lives. That's extremely bad. And furthermore, let's look to Mueller, who finds that an inverse relationship between income inequality and the stability of a democratic regime. And empirical studies note that high levels of income inequality significantly reduces electoral participation and political discussion. Now let's go to their fourth contention, which is about libertarianism. First of all, I'm going to give you an overwhelming observation, which is that they don't give you any impacts in this contention. It shouldn't be waived. Judge, please negate.
I'll start when you're ready.
So I would like to begin with a rhetorical question. Which developed nation has the lowest rates of violence, the highest GDP per capita, and the highest human rights index?
Unfortunately, I cannot tell you off the top of my head.
Norway, and Norway does not have a minimum wage.
But didn't my partner tell you why Norway is not a good example?
Well, first of all, I'm asking the questions, and actually I'd like to, what you just said, I'd like to lead into that. So how can you say that labor unions are a negative impact on the economy when in Norway and Sweden, again, countries with very similar economic distributions to the United States, unions have increased wages through bargaining to an average of $25 an hour. And also, when the statistics, when the claims you cited about the U.S. economy being stronger than Norway, where those claims are the ones that reflect the population disparity as opposed to, I said, how can you claim that labor unions are a negative impact when in all these countries they're increasing wages?
Okay, so like there's a fine line between increasing wages and increasing it to the point in which these small businesses are going to get run out of business. If anything, you're impacting your own contentions.
Well, hold on. Isn't that a contradiction? Because one of your contentions says
that there's a fine line between increasing it substantially to the point.
Well, if you said that increased wage, didn't you say that increased wages would lead to better government?
Wait, can I please finish?
Well, I'm saying, didn't you say that increased wages would be a positive impact on the economy? So how are our increased wages?
Explain?
Yes.
Cool. So what I'm trying to say here is there's a fine line between increasing the minimum wage and increasing it substantially to the point in which these small businesses can't afford it. What labor unions do is they band together, they do strikes, they make it so they put pressures on companies to raise the wage so far up in order so that their business doesn't
Then
crash.
how can you say that if we abolish the minimum wage? But wouldn't you agree that if we abolish the minimum, if you're saying if we abolish the minimum wage and wages go up, that you're not solving for your... Ladies, gentlemen, and judge, a core element of this debate has been how increased or decreased wages affects economic stimulus. Now, the negative side of this debate would have you believe that labor unions are a negative impact on the economy because labor unions cause wages to skyrocket, and this would occur more so in a world where the minimum wage does not exist. But Judge, the problem with this argument is that at the same time they're saying that getting rid of the minimum wage would lower wages, and thus the minimum wage serves its purpose by being a higher wage standard. So, Judge, they want you to believe that the high standard of wages set by the minimum wage will have a positive impact on the economy, but the higher standards of wages set by unions would have a negative impact on the economy, and this is just a blatant contradiction. So before they say that we don't address it, their concerns about health and GDP, again, all tie back to this issue of are workers able to spend more money? Are workers actually making more money? And the answer is no. Judges, part-time jobs, which we proved with our California statistic, would drastically increase as the minimum wage gets higher and as the minimum wage continues to stay in its current state. The part-time work often pays half or less of full-time work because the hours are cut, and upward mobility is less than it would be in full-time work, so workers are stagnant at the bottom of the barrel. So they also claimed that income inequality would increase if we abolished the minimum wage. But the fact of the matter is, countries like Norway, Sweden, and Israel have equal or less income inequality than the United States, and they have no minimum wage. So let's talk about this population issue that they have cited twice in a row at this point. Just because Norway has a different population than the United States does not make it an invalid example. Not only do we have statistics from states in the United States, but Norway's economic distribution, as well as Sweden's, is very similar to the United States'. Now, where the population does come into play is when they said the United States' economy is stronger than all these countries. Well, the only reason that is because the United States has tens of many times as workers, but relatively, meaning GDP per capita, these countries are better and stronger than the United States. They have greater human rights standards. And Sweden is regarded as the country with the best worker standards in the world. So their arguments are contradictory, and their expert opinions have less weight than the real cold hard facts. So, Judge, I urge an affirmative ballot. I now stand down for cross-examination.
So you're aware that there's a difference between an increase in the minimum wage and a significant increase because of labor unions, right?
I am aware of that. However,
so you're aware of that.
But
you're aware
the fact of the matter
I
is,
just want a yes or no answer. You're
yes, I'm aware of the difference.
I'm glad. All right. So now,
Yet the contradiction
let's talk
exists.
about jobs. All right. You guys are claiming that under the minimum wage world, as we see an increase, we're going to lose jobs, and you conceded to the fact that if we can prove to you otherwise, we win this debate, right?
Well, that's really up to the judges.
Okay. But are jobs increasing under your world?
Yes,
okay,
they are.
Great. So let me ask you something. Are those you said it yourself? Companies don't have an infinite amount of money, right, to spend on their employees.
No, of course they don't.
So when jobs increase in a company, are the wages of those workers going to go down?
I mean, not
Yes.
necessarily.
What do you
No,
mean
not
necessarily?
necessarily, because if the company itself gains more money from consumer spending, and you yourself claimed that consumer spending would enrich the economy,
The only way
and you
to do
yourself
that-
claimed that unions would raise would indirectly raise consumer spending.
You're misunderstanding. The only way to do that is to increase disposable income by increasing the minimum wage. Under your world, what we see is that we're not
Labor unions increase
increasing the minimum,
disposable
we're not
income.
increasing the wages whatsoever. We're just seeing a decrease in wages, but more jobs. So let me ask you something. If we see,
Then how are
if
your
we see
labor
some,
union point valid?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I believe I'm the one crossing you. When we see in a situation, we see someone that's making $10 an hour, and then we see the minimum wage abolished. Okay. When the more jobs are increased, do you believe that person's money is going to go down? That salary is going to go down?
No, not necessarily.
Why not? Because companies, you've said it yourself, they
Because-
don't have an infinite amount of money.
But companies can have more money. They don't have an infinite amount, but they can achieve more money through greater consumer
How
spending.
exactly are companies going to gain more money if
Because
people are
workers
getting
will work
lower
higher
wages?
hours, and the economy
So you're saying
will
workers
improve.
you're going to make workers work more?
Workers want to work more.
It-
Workers
that's
don't
fine.
enjoy
That's
being
fine.
unemployed.
Ladies and gentlemen, in regards to the billowing rhetoric and attacks of smoke coming, the billowing smoke of rhetoric and attacks coming out of the con, I suggest you take the advice of a 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and don't inhale. Just as in Mr. Clinton's case, inhalation may lead to an inability to discern fact from fiction, and I will show you why clearing the smoke that they are producing is so important to understanding the truth of this debate. Now, let's get this out of the way really quick, Judge. Their first point about not having an accurate comparison. Oh, Sweden and Norway, they're not like America. Well, here's the issue, Judge. This is inherently a theoretical. This is inherently something we are proposing. We can inherently not have an American statistic to prove the minimum wage must be abolished. Why can't we? Because the minimum wage exists. It hasn't been abolished. So we must inherently compare ourselves to other countries, because comparing ourselves to other countries gives us an objective and fairly reasonable standard to compare ourselves under, which is better than no standard at all. Now, in regards to predictions versus real case studies, they attack our case studies saying, oh, there's no causation. I'm sorry to inform you that 4,000 jobs in one industry, in one city, do not drop out of the air just like that. And 330,000 jobs are not lost in 1 month when there is no other major economic policy change occurring in that month. That was the only major economic policy change in that month. So there is a strong causation, contrary to what the have you believe. Now they claim that they turn our arguments. Our arguments are turned because our arguments are turned. Our arguments are only turned if you concede that the increase, that disposable income increases and that workers are paid more. Here's the issue. Workers are not paid more because businesses don't have more money to pay them. It's an inherent economic principle. You cannot simply create more money. Now, their statistics are simple predictions by Keynesian economists, not necessarily taking into account the reality of the situation. Here's the reality of the situation. Based on statistics, if you increase the minimum wage, workers don't make more income, they work less hours, or they get fired. So their whole turn is based on whether or not disposable income increases, and we have proved to you that disposable income does not increase. So clearly, Judge, and about our point about libertarianism, they said we didn't impact it. Allow me to impact it. Milton Friedman was the one who said, as the more economic liberties are restricted, it's a slippery slope. So, Judge, it is broke, and we shall fix it. Thank you. I urge a aft ballot.
Judges, I'd first like to point out that due to our observations and my opponent's failure to provide us with adequate observations, we need to rely this debate on our observations, which states, first of all, that whoever benefits the economy wins this round, and second of all, whoever can provide for every single citizen benefits this round. Now, we gave you 4 key impacts benefiting the economy, which, by the way, my opponents have not touched on whatsoever. The specific number of judges I want you to know is 6.8 million, and that means as we increase the minimum wage, we see 6.8 million people dragged above that poverty line from below it. So in a con world, we're seeing poverty go down, and when we see poverty go down, we see the economy increase. Now, my opponents want to talk about realistically, so let's talk realistically. They keep trying to bring up Sweden, Norway. They keep talking about how these countries are sensational. What is the abolishment of the minimum wage going to do? It's not going to just make America magically human right violation free. It's not going to make America some unbelievable country, because it's simply impossible to do that with one simple move. An abolishment of the minimum wage cannot, they have provided us with no evidence besides Sweden and Norway to prove to us why an abolishment of the minimum wage is going to provide impacts unique to their side. Now, I'll give you some impacts unique to our side. First of all, with disposable income. The only reason we see disposable income, which my opponents were unsure about, was we see disposable income when we increase minimum wage. Now, when we see an increase in labor unions on my opponent's side, we see wages going so substantially high that companies cannot afford to pay their employees more. So we see unions causing unemployment to go down. We see people's lives getting affected. And once again, we have to weigh this round on who benefits the people's lives the most. So, Judge, we see that unemployment goes up under the pro world. Second of all, we also see, if my opponents want to prove to us that their unemployment goes down, we see wages going down. We see companies not being able to afford to pay their employees as much. So we see more people getting dragged into poverty under the pro world because more and more people are getting less and less wages. And thus, Judge, if you want to talk about morality, let's talk about making sure that every single citizen gets what they need. Thank you.
Ladies, gentlemen, and Judge, let's talk about the impact that this debate has on the economy. Now, one of their biggest claims and one of their biggest impacts is disposable income. The fact of the matter is, disposable income would increase with labor unions. They admitted that labor unions would drive wages higher than the minimum wage. So, by their own logic, labor unions, those high wages would result in more disposable income, more consumer spending, so the businesses that have to pay the workers would then become richer themselves because people are buying their products and investing in them. The small businesses and the large businesses. And Judge, they talked about lifting 6.8 million people out of poverty, but this just simply wouldn't occur with a raise of the minimum wage. Many of these workers, as we saw in California, Norway, and Sweden, are not our only evidence. The fact of the matter is that these people would either be laid off or shifted into part-time jobs. Now, we clearly have the causation here, and we win in the long term because if 330,000 jobs are being lost every month, every time the minimum wage is drastically raised, and that's the place we're going with this, then in the long term, the impact will be even bigger. We have the greater impact on people's lives. We have the greater positive and unique impact of people's lives because we're giving these workers and these businesses more freedom by their own admission, directly or indirectly. The workers in our world would actually have more money to spend, which means the companies would have more money to spend. It's a simple principle of Keynesian economy. And the fact of the matter is, they cite economists' opinions as their only evidence, where what we have are cold, hard facts regarding hundreds of thousands of people and the state of their employment. So, Judge, if you care about the workers of this great country. If you care about turning the United States, it may not happen overnight, but this is a positive change for the future into a country like Norway or Sweden, then please vote for the affirmative. Thank you.
Everyone ready?
Yeah.
Quick off-the-cuff roadmap, observations, then voting issues, and then we should be done. Cool. So time will start now. So first let's start with observations. So they never really touch upon our observations, and the most important one here is that all lives should matter equally, no matter their social status or whatever. So we say that whichever team best quantifies and weighs and outweighs with lives should ultimately win this debate. They concede to this framework, judges should be voting off this framework. And so now let's go on to unemployment, which has been a huge clash in this debate so far. So both of us can agree that disposable income leads to more employment. And so let me tell you exactly why this disposable income is unique to our side. So basically they tell you unions lead to increased wages, yet they tell you in the rebuttal that it skyrockets wages, right? That's the major difference. We're advocating for an increase of $2, $3. They're advocating for an increase of $10, right? It's not realistic. When we increase it that much, these small businesses, they can't afford to stay there. However, $2 to $3, these small businesses can handle while gaining these accesses to disposable income. That's why disposable income is unique to our side. Judge, you have to pull that down. Furthermore, let me tell you the difference between unions and increasing the minimum wage however much we want to. So when we increase the minimum wage, look to the Congressional Budget Office, finds $2 million of real income. They never touch upon that statistic. Judge, pull that down as well. However, when we tell you that unions leads to a 1.24% decrease in economic growth for every 1% increase in labor unions, that's the big difference, Judge. You have to pull that down. Now let's talk about the economic impacts that we bring up throughout our entire debate. And so the first is decreased poverty. We see a 1% increase in economic growth leads to a 1.7% decrease in poverty. And this is quantified through Juve, who finds that when we increase the minimum wage, we lead to 6.8 million lives being saved. Judge, if you vote on our framework, you vote for us. Now let's talk about how child mortality rates, they never touch upon this either. We say 1% increase in economic growth leads to 0.7% decrease in infant mortality. That's even more lives, Judge. Please wait there. And then let's talk about the increase in spending on health and education. We're providing for the future. When we increase spending on health, that means less deaths. And when we increase spending on education, that means better future for the students. That means overall we're winning there. And now let's talk about how they drop outsourcing, they drop inequality. Outsourcing leads to less jobs. If jobs is really that important, why did they drop outsourcing? And furthermore, income inequality leads to an unstable regime, and it also in fact leads to more violence, which is more lives, Judge. If you're going to be voting on lives, you vote for us. Please negate.